Hey, have you ever worked with a pendulum? So if you're not familiar with a pendulum, and I meant to like kind of put one together, but of course I didn't do that. But a pendulum is basically like a piece of string with something hanging on the bottom. So in contemporary society, a lot of the times you can buy a pendulum and there's a crystal on the end. But it could be a button, it could be anything that will dangle on the end of a string. And pendulums are a tool of divination. But what a pendulum does is it gives you a yes or no answer. So you can ask the pendulum, give me a yes, and it will go like that. And say, give me a no, and it'll make a circle. And so you can tell what the answer is based on the direction and trajectory of the little thing on the end of the string. And so a lot of people will use it like, should I take this supplement? Yes or no. But to me, they are very cumbersome to use because you have to ask a lot of questions to get a very specific answer. So tonight on Thursday Night Live, we're going to be talking about a different tool, and it's an intuitive tool called gauges. So stay tuned, and we're going to dig right into this subject in a second. Hello and welcome to Thursday Night Live. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show tonight. So I wanted to share this story before we go into the exciting world of gauges. So, I feel like everything was like a million years ago, but a million years ago, I was working at a Whole Life Expo in the Seattle area. That's where I was living. And I was having an exceptional show. I was busy the whole time. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go treat myself to something. And there was this guy who had a booth. Like, for some reason, he was always in this booth next to me for years. And I decided I was going to go get a session with him. And so I go, and to make a long story short, he was like, well, I don't really have anything to clear for you, because he did clearing. He used a pendulum and had these charts to find out areas in your life that weren't really working. And then he would clear them. And he was doing his pendulum, and he was like, yeah, I got nothing. Now, I asked him if I could have my $20 back, but he wasn't going for that. And he goes, well, is there anything that you want to know? Or something, I don't remember. But anyway, I said to him, pendulums don't work for me. And he looked at me, he goes, nah, pendulums work for everybody. And so he handed me his pendulum, and he said, show me your yes. And I hold it, and it's doing this. And he goes, show me your no. And it's doing this. And he said, say, my name is Sam. And I said, my name is Sam. And that bad boy just stopped and hung down. So he took the pendulum back, cleared it, did this stuff. We do the exact same thing. He said, my name is Sam. And that bad boy just stopped. So I knew that pendulums just don't work for me. And I know why they don't work for me, because they are so freaking slow to get an answer. So I asked that question a little earlier. People will use a pendulum to say, well, should I take this supplement? And you can suffice it at taking a yes or no answer, but you might want to know, how much benefit am I getting from taking this supplement? So you can go like 0 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%. I don't know. You can break it up into chunks, waiting for a yes answer. And so let's say it's like 40 to 50%, and then you can go 41%, 42%, 43%. Too slow. Don't have the patience for it. Even if a pendulum worked for me, I don't think I would use it, because I don't have the time for it. So tonight we are going to be talking about gauges, because what you can do with a gauge is, instead of just asking a yes or no question, which you can use a gauge for, you can actually get a numeric output in the form usually of a percent. And when you work with and create a gauge, it's in your mind's eye, so it's all in your head. And what you create in your mind's eye can be any style of gauge you want. So it can be like one of those round gauges, pressure gauges that go around. I personally like a speedometer. So if you've ever seen me on the show doing this, that's because I am employing my gauge, because in addition to looking at it, I like to feel where the pressure shifts and where it locks in at. And so if you see me doing this, no, I am using a gauge in that moment. But you can use any style. Again, I like the speedometer style. Personally, mine either goes from 1 to 100 or 1 to 10, kind of depending on the moment. But they're any kind of percent. And so when you work with gauges, kind of like the pendulum, I mean, it's actually the exact same thing as the pendulum. The question needs to be very specific, because a slight different interpretation on the question can give you a very different answer. Now, gauges are really easy to use, so I don't want you to be intimidated, because we're all going to be creating gauges tonight. But it's about the question. So again, a million years ago, I was teaching a psychic development class, and it was like a 6-part series. So one night we discussed gauges. And so what I decided to do, so that they would be overwhelmed with the power of gauges, I took a bunch of index cards, and I put like on each card like 10, 20, 30, 40, or maybe like 20, 46. I didn't want to make a million cards, but I put the numbers on the gauges, and I had one little pack for each person in the class to use. And then each person in the class got to ask a question. So they would ask the question, I would reformat the question into a phrase that would make it work with a gauge. And then they would sit there and look at the cards and hold up what card, they thought the gauge was at. And miraculously, almost everybody in the room on every question had the same answer. I mean, sometimes, someone had like 20 to 40 and someone had 40 to 60, and it was a little bit of difference, and I could see that. Except one time. So a woman asked a question about her relationship, like, is this a good relationship for me? And everybody in the class got like 20%, because my opinion was the guy didn't have good energy, except for one woman. And she held up the 80 card. And so of course I had to call her out, because I wasn't getting 80. And I said, well, do you think that, this relationship is good for her? And she was like, no, but she wants to be in a relationship, and that's what the 80 is. And she did. The woman wanted to be in a relationship, but it's just not that relationship. And so even though they're very similar questions, the questions matter. Okay, so you guys ready? You ready to create your first gauge, intuitive gauge? So please go ahead and close your eyes. I need for you to follow along with me, or else you're just not going to get it. Close your eyes, and we're just going to take a couple of seconds to relax our bodies, relax our mind. And take a nice deep breath and exhale. And another nice deep breath And just allow anything that you might be thinking about or holding on to or contemplating or worrying about or anything like that to just drop off of you and your body and go down to the center of the planet. So I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that you can see a gauge. I mean, my gauge is usually about like right here, like as if I'm reading a book. It's just right there. And I just want you to imagine this gauge. And again, any kind you want. It could be a scale. It could be that round gauge. Again, I like the speedometer. Doesn't matter. Gauge, mind's eye. And I would like for you, once you have that in your mind's eye, to imagine that there is a little line of energy, like a thread of energy going from the bottom of that gauge all the way down to the center of the planet. And allow that line of energy, that little baby grounding cord, to drain away any of your doubt or fear or any misconceptions about your performance in being able to do this exercise. You know, it's much more impactful when you're doing this in a whole room full of people, but I think you will get the idea. And what I'm conveying to you is that this is a very useful tool that you can use every day if you want to. Okay. And so I would like for you to think about a supplement or a food or a medication, just one. Okay. So not multiple, just one specific thing, you know, so food, medication, supplement, and ask yourself, how much benefit is this giving me? And then again, check in on your meter. You know, if you have a piece of paper there, maybe take a little note, make a mental note, because I'm going to go over what the numbers kind of identify. Okay, so let's try a different, I mean, it was that quick. Here's a different thing. So if you're working on a project, whether it's a home project, a work project, you know, anything that you're putting energy in, how much energy am I putting into this project? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up on that. How much am I benefiting from this project? Because you might be putting a lot of energy in, but you might not be getting the benefit of it. Here's a good one. Where is my anxiety level now? So from 0 to 100, where is my anxiety level now? Okay. Next question. How much resistance am I feeling towards X? So pick an item that you need to do or want to do and ask, how much resistance am I feeling towards it? Okay. So here's the key. So if the number that you're getting on your gauge is less than 50%, okay, well, there's two things. So if, let's say, you ask the question, how much benefit am I getting from this? And the number is 50% or less, you might want to stop and re-examine, is it worth your time and energy or expense in dealing with, in doing that thing? Okay. If it's 60%, usually the person is in agreement. They are thinking about it. but they haven't necessarily taken action. Usually action occurs at 70%. Most people, or it's not healthy to get 100%. 90% is going to leave you exhausted. So taking action at 70% is good, unless you ask the question, where is my anxiety level? And it's at 70% or 80%, then maybe not a good number. Maybe you want it more at 20 or 30%. And if it's at that 70%, you need to take a look at it. The only places where, to me, all right, and these are the ones that I was just thinking of off the top of my head, where you want things actually to be at that 50%. One is in relationships. They say relationships should be 50-50. I don't know that I've ever seen a relationship that was 50-50. Having it be 60-40 is okay. But if you sit there and ask yourself, how much, how much energy am I putting into this relationship? And you get 80%, and that other person is only putting in 20%, then you might want to reevaluate it. So again, relationships, 50-50. That's the golden mean. It doesn't have to be, but if it's really off, like if you're only putting in 10% of your energy, it's like, well, why are you there? Why are you in the relationship in the first place? Unless you're a user, parasite person. And then the only other place is in certain health things, especially when dealing with hormones. And so, like, for example, when I evaluate someone's thyroid hormones, it's like you want it to be at that 50% because that says it's balanced. There's not too much, there's not too little, and so in things that need to be balanced, you want it at that 50%. I guess in the relationships, you want it to be balanced, so you want it at that 50%. So if there's a question you're asking and it's about balance, you want that 50% number. Anyway, so as you can see, just in doing this little exercise, how quick and easy getting the answers on the gauge, using a gauge actually is. And so I hope that you will try using it and working with it as you go through your daily life. I mean, I don't use a gauge every day, but there are a lot of instances where I will use a gauge. I will use a gauge. Okay. So, I don't know. I think we are going to get started with the readings after this word from me.
Exhausted from chasing mystery symptoms, bouncing from doctor to doctor only to be told your labs are perfectly normal, even though you know deep down that something is very wrong. If you feel stuck, drained, and completely ignored by the traditional system, it's time to look deeper. Perhaps it's time you discovered the transformative work of Dr. Rita Louise. As a naturopathic physician and highly gifted medical intuitive, she bridges the gap between science and spirit, offering answers that conventional medicine often misses. So what exactly is a medical intuitive? Think of it as an energetic MRI. Instead of just treating surface symptoms, Dr. Rita tunes directly into your body's unique energy field. She can see where deep blockages, lifelong imbalances, or trapped emotions are creating real physical pain and illness. What makes her truly unique is that she combines this profound intuitive ability with her formal training as a naturopathic physician. She doesn't just sense the problem, she understands the anatomy and physiology behind it. This powerful combination lets her bypass the guesswork and get straight to the root cause. Whether you need a comprehensive medical intuitive reading, spiritual counseling to break toxic patterns, or distance energy healing to clear deep blockages, Dr. Rita delivers the exact missing pieces you've been searching for. True healing is physical, emotional, and energetic. You don't have to navigate this alone in the dark anymore. Stop guessing with your health. Visit soulhealer.com today to schedule your private consultation with Dr. Rita Louise and finally get the answers you deserve.